I have flown to Barcelona, Spain to play the most important tournament of my life. The Sunway Chess International, regrouping 242 chess players from over 40 different countries. At my current rating of 2079, this is a global test of my true level against top competition. Only 12 points away from my peak achieved last month, I seek to cross 2100 for the first time ever. And welcome to episode 6 of my 10-round tournament in Sitges, Spain. This recap is sponsored by our friends over at ChessReps. If you're looking for a way to memorize your openings in a science-backed way, I highly recommend ChessReps' software. You can choose from a multitude of openings from their diverse catalog. You can also now create a chess course from your own PGN file and learn through the ChessReps software. Find the link in my description to try ChessReps for free for 7 days. 3 wins out of 4 games so far, and here is my biggest challenge in this classical tournament. I am facing a Grandmaster. The most coveted title in all of chess is bound to face me, and he arrives 25 minutes late to the board and plays the move d4, a move he has not often played in his very illustrious career, and I knew he was going to play this incredible surprise because he played it only once earlier this tournament, and I had my doubts. So I did have some preparation against this very new move. Usually, Orelvis goes with 1e4. My opponent is a Spanish Grandmaster whose peak is 2504 to be exact. So I was definitely nervous when facing this very strong opponent. So d5, knight f3, and now I go knight f6, and we get into the opening called the Vienna. And no, not your Gotham chess Vienna with the white pieces in the e4 openings, but this is the d4 Vienna game. And so here, I played the move d takes c4, which is known to be a little bit more aggressive than other options in these lines. Oftentimes you can have some dry positions here, and I wanted to make it as sharp as possible against my older Grandmaster opponent. So takes, my opponent goes e3, opening up the bishop and preparing to take back, and now I go with a6. My idea is that on bishop takes, I want b5, hitting the bishop, and then I can quickly accelerate my development with bishop b7 and develop quickly a bishop on this very nice long diagonal. So my opponent goes a4, prophylactically blocking this b5 move, and now I go for bishop b4. So here we're pinning the knight. Yes, white is going to capture back this pawn here, but when bishop takes c4 happens, now I have b6, and I'm going to develop my bishop here on b7 with a very nice long diagonal. Castles, bishop b7, and now my opponent goes for this very aggressive knight e5, basically violating one of the key principles of the opening, moving a piece twice in the opening. Yes, my opponent already castled, but my opponent is neglecting development, and you will see this problem gets enhanced greater and greater as the game goes on, and my opponent ignores development. So I go knight bd7. I'm trying to challenge this knight on e5 and engage this f4, and now I want to attack the center. So when your opponent is attacking you on a flank file like F, G, or H, it is always known that you want to attack the center to punish. So C5 is very highly justified here. And here my opponent takes a think. Reminder, he's 25 minutes behind, but so far he's blitzed out his moves. But here he takes a think and comes up after a very long time with knight A2. So takes like 14 minutes on this move, and his idea is like, look, you played c5, you blocked in your bishop, I'm gonna gain your bishop pair with knight takes b4, and you can't do anything about it. So I reflected on this because it's a very interesting moment. White is challenging my belief that my bishop pair is good and strong, and that without it on the board, I'll be less good. So chess is all about an argument. One side argues something, and the other side argues another thing. So my argument in reverse was, what if I just castle? So after castle, knight takes b4, c takes b4, and my opponent, yes, gained the bishop pair, but that bishop pair doesn't look all that good because of this dark squared bishop, which is just laying behind this pawn structure and completely passive, like terrible bishop. And I thought after bishop d2, even trying to recalibrate the bishop here, it's not enough. So I go a5, just completely making this bishop bite on granite. And now my opponent has to play a couple moves to get this bishop back into the game. And of course, I want to prevent this bishop from going to h4, getting back into the game, pinning my knight would be very unpleasant. So I go with knight e4, prophylactically playing against this bishop here on e1. And my opponent, with now 30 minutes left on his clock, on move 14, mind you, so he needs to get to move 40 to get more time on his clock, he plays the very interesting move bishop h4 after like a 7-minute think, and now he's down to 23 minutes, and we get this extremely sharp position. Wow, sharp on sharp. My opponent is sacrificing his bishop. Sacrificing, I say, because it's a sham sacrifice. My opponent's going to take here on d7. So I thought if queen takes, knight takes d7, and here it looks very unpleasant because of this fork. So I thought, well, what if I sack my queen? So knight takes, bishop takes queen, sacrificing my queen for 2 minor pieces, and I'm threatening this, and I'm threatening this, and this is a fork. This looks very pleasant for the black pieces, but I couldn't convince myself to do it because of this queen c1 defending this and attacking my knight. But here, you have a fantastic move, rook c8, that I completely missed. So not only defending the knight, but insisting on this discovered attack potentially, while keeping the threat on this bishop, which I missed completely in the game. And I thought of some bishop a6, which completely equalizes and is not so good. So knight takes d5 was better and winning for the black pieces, but after a very long think myself, I go with an even crazier variation than this somehow. You see, after queen takes, knight takes, this is a fork, but after rook here, knight takes, and then knight f6, a very special move with knight g4 coming. If the knight takes my rook, I have this very nice knight g4, and I'm attacking this, e3, then I would fork these 2 pieces, and here I found equality after takes, takes, and then queen takes, let's say, and even a small edge. But there was a problem in this line. After knight f6, white can simply play queen e1, and this completely fractures my attack, and this opponent is still attacking my rook. I said, hell no. So I said to myself, what if I save this move, like this extra move that I put in that combination, and play instead the instant knight f6, sacrificing in exchange in an already fork while asking this knight to trade itself against my knight. And the point is that I had is if you take, I have knight g4. But this is what happened in the game, so let me explain other variations. Knight takes, queen takes, and this bishop is clearly superior to this one, and I thought black had a small edge here. And if knight takes, it's the game, but just less good with knight g4. So my opponent takes the exchange up, and now I have a very vibrant attack, knight g4, threatening checkmate in 1 move, so h3 is played, and now I take this with a fork on the rook and queen. And so queen e1 is played, I trade queens, and now I take this bishop on c4, and I have a pawn and a minor piece for a knight. And this knight is in deep trouble, so it has to move, and now I get my second pawn, this pawn on b2. And the reason why I went for this is that when knight takes pawn, yes, it seems that I'm in a deficit, like I have a pawn in exchange for a rook, but the pawn that I have up is so strong, is so blatantly strong, that here I thought black was actually winning. But it is objectively equal, but black has practical chances to win this game. And so I played rook d8, saving my rook, attacking this pawn, rook c1, and now I play h5. So this rook is going to come into the game. I have to kind of stop this pile of pawns, but I also have to save and deter any back rank checkmate ideas. So I go pawn to h5, knight c4. And here a very interesting moment arises where my opponent actually, I think, underestimated the trade on c4 for bishop e4. And now it gets very interesting because the tables look like they've turned a little bit. My bishop is taking up the promotion square of this pawn, and my pawn is threatening b3, b2, and suddenly big danger. So my opponent has to defend by placing rooks behind the pawn here, the pass pawn, the protected pass pawn. So rook ac1. And now I have to get off of this rook c8. In these 2 rooks against minor piece and rook, you want to keep as many pieces on the board. When you're in a material deficit or on paper a material deficit, you want to keep all the pieces on the board, which means that I want to save my rook from this pin, which would effectively trade off rooks. So I go for king h7, my opponent goes for rook c8, and now I go for rook d6. So evading all the trades, now you can't try to trade against me anymore because my bishop takes up this c6 square. So rook to b8, my opponent, mission accomplished, is defending against this pawn, but now white has all these loose pawns that are collaborating for me getting 2 pawns for the exchange down. And so rook c5, forking these 2 pawns, but really white wants to take this pawn and create their own counterplay. So I block this, bishop d5, I don't want to give this with check, and I'm opening up my rook to take this pawn, a 3rd pawn for the exchange. So my opponent indulges, takes on a5, and here I had a very interesting choice, whether I want to play b3, rook here, and then rook takes, which I thought was pretty good, or rook takes. And here I completely missed that my opponent can play rook a b5, and after b3, rook b4. I missed this rook b4, and now my rook is completely out of the game, and suddenly it's equal. Before, if you thought black had chances, which I did, they aren't there anymore. Why? Because when I move my rook, let's say rook f5, the way to get back into the game would be something like this. Well, now my opponent can just come back down with the pawn, and after this rook e5, to try to get back into the game, there's this really nifty king f2, which is all played in the game. And my rook is completely burdened with any way to return into the game. So I play rook check, and here I'm literally offering him a draw. The only thing Orelvis has to do is repeat, and he'll get a draw from me because there's no way for me to get back into the game, even though I have 2 pawns for the exchange down. But my opponent plays, after rook f5, no repetitions, plays king e3. And the message is clear. My opponent is playing for a win no matter what. And so king e3 gives this pawn, but he wants to activate his king in exchange and bring his king in and acting as a piece worth 4 in the endgame. So I take on g2, liberating my rook, and here Orelvis prevents my rook from getting back into the game again, but here I have bishop d5, once again only move in this position, and black has a slight advantage. I'm blocking this rook from any trades, and my rook is now perfectly placed to go rook f3 and defend here. But now my opponent goes a6, he's threatening a7. It looks like it's very hard for the black pieces to defend this, but I played rook f3 check, king moves, and here there's a very nice, interesting detail that I missed in the game. So obviously I want to get my rook on a3 to defend against this pawn, and the way to do that is to sacrifice a pawn, which I played in the game. But here, after rook takes, rook attacking this pawn, white has a resource which I missed, which is rook b7. Insane move. The defensive move, and the idea is that white is trading off this pawn for this very important pawn, which engages in an immediate draw. What I should have played is rook takes this pawn first, really zero worries about this pawn potentially queening soon, and now b2, rook takes, and now rook a3, and the difference is there's no rook b7 here because I just take, and now I have 3 pawns for the rook, and this is completely fine. I'll eventually sack my rook here against the pawn for these passed pawns, and this will be winning for the black pieces. So I played b2, takes, rook a3, and now rook b6 was played. My opponent missed the last defensive resource here, and here I get to play rook takes. I have time to take this pawn because after a2, rook here, and you cannot defend this pawn. It's just magic on the chessboard. So after rook takes h3, my opponent goes king c5, and now I come immediately back to a3, and both of my pieces are defending this promotion square, which is extremely important, while my forces just rise up this board. And so at this moment in the game, I have 37 minutes on my clock, we reached 40 moves, and my opponent has more time on his clock too. After king b7, I had to think. And I think to myself, how are you going to push these passed pawns? You see, I have 3 passed pawns here, and it's very important that I know how and in what order I push these pawns. So for me, it was quite clear that I wanted to keep this pawn on f7 as long as possible, because I want a shield for my king. So I want my king to avoid those excessive repetitional checks. And as well, I want to push my pawns up the board, these 2. So how am I going to do it? So I know as a fact that 2 pawns on the 6th rank, in this case on the 3rd rank, equals a rook. So if I get 2 pawns on this 3rd rank, I basically win the game as the black pieces because I have 2 rooks and a piece up for these 2 rooks, right? So my goal is to play something like this so I can always get my king to go between, like a maze, like, like snakes and ladders, between my pawns and always hide. And then when possible, maybe I go g4 and then h3 and then g3 and then I can be winning. So something like this. So I went move by move. It's very important. You have a global plan and then move by move in the end game. So global plan, push your pawns, move by move, g5, rook b7, I go king g6. Now rook b8, my opponent is threatening some checks from behind, and now we play h4. So my king can now slide between my pawns and always avoid these checks. So king b6, my opponent is trying to leverage this a7, a8 push to cash in. h3, and already here it gets pretty scary, like bishop g2, h2 is already a threat. So a7, I go g4 here, and now rook g8, and a very important moment arises in which I should have played king h5, rook h8, king g5, rook g8 check, and king h4. This is more precise than the game because here I get king g3 for free, whereas king f5, suddenly after rook f2, I still have to figure out how to win this, and the endgames arising from this position, so the trade of rooks or bishop f3, are very, very sharp. So I have 2 options here, bishop f3, which is what I played, or rook f3, which I thought was very, very like playing with fire. So takes. This would be winning because on account of queen, bishop takes, rook takes, and here I would have two passed pawns on the 6th, which we talked about is worth a rook. But what if he doesn't take? So like, I was thinking rook d2. I didn't know here. Anyways, I found a win directly with bishop f3, which was, you know, in hindsight, kind of risky, but there are no non-risky trails here. It's very, very unclear. So my opponent promotes here using the pin of this bishop to make a queen so that we trade rooks. So that's a huge accomplishment for my opponent. And now we have this endgame in which I have 4 pawns and a bishop for 2 rooks. So how do you evaluate this, you know, as a chess player? Like, how do you know that black is better or white is better or this is equal? Well, all lies in this king. You see, if this king was here, I think not only would it be equal, but white could have some chances if black misplays. But in this position, this king is so cut off and far away from my passed pawns that if I shoulder the king righteously, I can get 2 pawns on the 6th worth a full rook. So then rook for 2 pawns. And then if I can get this pawn on the 7th, bishop and pawn is worth a full rook. And then this one, I would have a pawn up on f7. So that was my logic going into this endgame. And so now you have to calculate the concrete moves. So like you have to justify why you think you're better. So I had seen that if I prioritize this pawn being very strong from early on, this rook will have no activity. So that's what I go for. e5, king goes back into the game, e4, and now rook g8. And here I play e3. So just immediately 3 pawn moves consecutively, attacking this rook now, and rook f1, e2, and rook e1. So my pawn went from e6, zoomed to e2, and now I can justify that this bishop and pawn is worth this rook. What now needs to be argued is these 2 pawns need to be worth this rook. So I need to get this pawn on the 6th, and then I have some real chances. So I go h2 now, I'm threatening promotion and forcing rook h8 to prevent this promotion, and now I came up with a very nice idea that's super sharp, h1 queen. So I'm sacking a pawn and bishop, so the exchange, the original exchange back that I sacrificed earlier on in the game, for 3 pawns. But my opponent doesn't go for this line because he feels that king e4, and suddenly how do you stop this? It's completely losing, like this. I was thinking f5, king here, and I cash in for this rook, and then this pawn is just super queening. So after takes, my opponent cannot take my bishop, realizes and takes this pawn. And now this endgame arises, which I very, very funnily enough had in my Laval tournament, on which I did recaps way back in June. You can check that out. It will be in the description below if you need. I had this this 2 pawns and bishop with the white pieces completely flipped on the board. Although in that endgame, I remembered it was a draw because the king could get before the pawns. So I knew that this is winning for black unless white gets their king here and gets their king in front of the pawns to intercept. But if the king is shouldered away, which is a very important endgame device, black will be fine. So king f4 here. I'm simply putting my king on a square that would defeat all of this king's possibilities to get back into the game. So rook f2 check, bishop f3, the only move, otherwise I lose this pawn. So I block, king d4, and now f5. And my opponent was stunned by this, because here if I go a check to your rook, let's say this, king here, and now king e3, and all of a sudden it's a little bit harder to me, but I think this is still winning. So, but I think we had both seen the same thing, and on f5 it was like, oh, of course, you're just delaying everything, and you can get check with f4 when the king goes to e3 immediately. So my opponent plays rook b2. I just improve my pawns, so I go here to g2, and he realizes like here that he's got nothing. Like here, g2, king, rook here, bishop here, and then this is queening. And he realizes, okay, what if I check this king? So here, check, this, king here, and then I just queen, right? So it's all pretty completely over. Like this, this one was a nice little trick as well. So he plays rook b1, I go g2, and now he goes with rook c1. He's just waiting until king here, and f4, but I have a little trick up my sleeve, and this move concluded one of the most important chess games in my entire career so far. I played the move bishop e2. And my opponent holds out his hand like this. I'm not even kidding. It's not a handshake like this like you normally get. He's like giving the game, but he doesn't want to give it. And he resigns because I'm getting bishop f1 in and g1 queen. And if the rook goes to g1, this is a complete lock on the rook, and this king will come in with my pawn, and there's no chance for the white pieces. And I beat my first Grandmaster ever in classical chess. A huge honor and a major achievement for myself. You know, so far in this tournament, I have 3 out of 4 points, which is good. I played against only lower rated players for my wins, but this moment in the tournament is my breakout moment. I defeated a high rated opponent, and I break out from that ping pong of playing up, playing down, and winning and losing and winning and losing. Now I beat a strong player, which means next round I will also be playing up against an even stronger player. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in round 7 recap of the Sunway Chess Festival.